Okay, so I first of all I'd like to thank the organizers of the 8th Padjadjaran International Nursing Conference. Uh, so the topic that was given to me is very broad, so I took a liberty of uh, picking some only issues that I consider main challenge in achieving SDGs. And on the end of the presentations, I'd like to discuss a little bit about how higher education institutions can play a role in meeting these challenges. So let me begin uh, with this illustration. So uh, if if I want to collapse SDGs, you know that SDG is quite complex. It involves a lot of dimensions, so many buzzwords. Yeah? So, but if I want to collapse all SDGs into one single term, I would call it justice. Yeah? So, SDG, in my view, is our response to various kind of injustice as a result of development that is not really uh, optimal in many sense. Yet, it will make sense if uh, I distinguish two kind of justice. The first is what I call, or what we call, intergenerational justice, and then the other one is the intragenerational justice. So the intragenerational justice is how uh, welfare, yeah, or income is or is fairly fairly shared, yeah, among group of people or among individuals that live within one generation. I mean, among us today. So that's the first justice that SDGs would like to address. And then the second one is the intergenerational justice. So the justice that involve the allocations of welfare or income among people with different generations. So with our uh, offspring later on. So the first justice, which is intragenerational justice, is uh, is not I won't say it's easy to handle, but it's a lot easier to handle compared to the second one. Because when someone within one year generation feel marginalized because of like unfair development outcome, so these marginalized people will be able to say something, yeah, or protest uh, to get better treatment, for example. You have a political channel of how to do it. Yet, if you are marginalized but you are not born yet, which is your offspring, there's no one here today that can represent them to say something. So, the challenge to the second kind of injustice is even more challenging than the first one. Okay, so let me explore a little bit more about this in relation to the SDG so that I can convince you that my representations of this SDG in one single word is actually makes sense. So as you see that this is the MDGs transformed to SDG from 8 development agendas, as you can see here, into the 17 development agenda you can see from the right side. uh, Hold on. Okay. So when you see the transformation, you can see actually, uh, of course, the expansions of the goals from 8 to 17 that multiply more than 2 times. Yet, if you really look it carefully, you may see that many of the extension involve this uh, part where two kind of injustice were explicitly addressed. Yeah. For example, SDGs compared to MDGs emphasize what we call the leaving no one behind. So you cannot leave people behind in the development process. That's the motto of the SDGs. And then we can see here, for example, there are several uh, expansion. For example, poverty is expanded into 3 goals, and then you have new goals that is related directly to, for example, reduce inequality. Yeah, and then if you look into the detail of the indicator of the SDG, actually in all of the indicator of SDG, you also explicitly explicitly measure the progress of not only the average population but also population of the bottom, let's say bottom populations, bottom 40% below, low. I mean the bottom 40% poorest, and then that represent the first kind of injustice, which is social inequality. And then the second one is MDG expand from one, the environmental sustainability in the MDG is expanded into 6 at least environmental goals. So this is expansions of the second kind of injustice, which is intergenerational justice. So this is the reasons why I insist that actually all of these buzzwords come into just one single word. SDG actually is a response to all of this still injustice or fair, unfair outcome of development both at the global level, national level, and at local level. So now, because this is a nursing conference, let me highlight examples of the challenge that we face, yeah, in SDGs from the perspective of health. So this is my favorite. So stunting. Yeah. So if you see here on the left part of the slides, you can see that Indonesia is long way behind in terms of reducing stunting. This is the data from the World Bank. So as you can see in Indonesia today, in 2020 actually, is still more than 30% of children under 5 is stunted. This is much higher than, not to mention Thailand, but even to Vietnam, and definitely is well above the middle income country average. Indonesia is a middle income country. So we are actually perform much less than what we should have been, considering our income per capita is actually part of the almost upper middle income country. So very bad. Yeah. So then I stumble upon a paper on this right side of the slide that measures how stunting can contribute to the decline in economic growth. And then economic growth actually, well, this is economics, yeah, it's my area. So the economic growth is very important in many aspects. So if we can link directly this stunting to economic growth, so this may be a good or not a good, an alternative understanding of how to address, how to add relevance to this aspect. So from this paper, actually, I'm summarize some of the finding that is relevant to us here. So the approach that this paper took is with what we call the development accounting framework. So stunting. So stunting here is related to the income per capita by 3 different channels. So the first channel is its effect on cognitive, which is, I think, definitely has been well researched, yeah, in the literatures. And then its effect on height. There is a direct connection between height and earning. And also its effect through years of education. So the good thing about this paper is they measures quantitatively all of these parameters. So and they with Indonesian, this is here to. Can you imagine that if today the stunting rate of children under 5 is 30%, so all workforce, all labor in Indonesia born between 1960, not the pension, not the retired one, yeah. So the working force, the working labor force in Indonesia today are those who are 15, from 15 years old to 60 years old. So it means they who were born from 1960 to 15 years ago. Okay, so that's labor force. If today is 20%, so you can imagine that the stunting that this number is mentioned that 50 half, more than half, I think around 60% of Indonesian labor force, yeah, they were stunted during childhood. So our worker, yeah, is one of two our worker, Indonesian worker, is actually stunted during childhood. And with all this effect, they calculated that actually our income per capita could have been 10.5% higher. So if there's no stunting. So I took a liberty of using these numbers to calculate uh, the prospect of Indonesian aspirations, because to have a higher income, to become a group of high income country in 2045. As you know, Indonesia was independent in 1945. And then in 2045, Indonesia will become 100 years old as an independent country. And then we have aspiration that in that year, we're going to escape from the middle income trap to become one of the group of high income country. And Indonesia is not alone. Actually, Vietnam independent was also almost the same. 10 days after we independence, they have also the same aspiration. So we have a competitor. So, but we can see here, some data from the World Bank. This is how Indonesia today. Around the Indonesian income per capita today is around $4,000. So $4,140 per person per year. Yeah. So if so, this is actually even not yet what belong to the upper middle income threshold, because of the COVID crisis. Yeah. And the high income threshold that we want to achieve in 2055 is actually $13,000. So that one. So if Indonesian economic growth is basically the same as like 10 years ago, which is 5.5% per year. So if you extrapolate this to 2045, we would not achieve it. Yeah. So, but when you combine this number, yeah, with that extrapolation, if we add at least if we add 10% at least that number to 2045, which means assuming that we gradually eradicate stunting, then this will help Indonesia to achieve high income country in 2045. So the relationship between health and economy is very close here, yeah, very well associated. That actually stunting can help Indonesia income per capita, so we can get out of the middle income trap. So now the next part of my talk is why we have so many stunting, for example. Well, again, I think if we have income per capita as high as upper middle income country, but Indonesia still have a lot of stunting, I think the thing that I naturally as an economist blame is that high income per capita is not equally distributed. Yeah. So if Indonesia have high income or high growth, but many people still struggle to find good food, one of the reason of stunting, it means Indonesian inequality is high. Indonesian poverty is still high. because the more you have the poor in one country, even if the average population has high income, so we are still in struggle to find food that have good nutrition, right? So high inequality lead to high poverty, lead to high malnutrition, it lead to high stunting device despite we have high average income. So this is exactly the point of the first kind of injustice that we have that has to be responded by SDG. So Indonesia, in fact, if you see this figure, is actually among the 15% highest in inequality in the world. So this matter. And low health status, such as malnutrition, is also not only associated with inequality, but also in economic resources itself. And as you can see, uh, when you have high resources, when you have high income per capita, you have more fiscal space that you can get from your citizens. So malnutrition should be addressed only not by by making people getting rich, but also government can help through redistributions, and government can help to subsidizations or something like that, or even to make sure that everyone get social assistance. Yeah. So this figure show that the richer you are, the more role that the government has on the economy. It means what? It means one of them is redistribution to reduce income inequality, right? So, but in order to do that, we have to have high income first to redistribute. So Indonesia actually, with the income per capita in purchasing power parity, I think this one is high. So it's 20% only the share of the government, but US is high. So my point here is that not only that we have to have also higher growth, yeah, to have high income, higher resource, but also equally important is we have to have also that growth is equally distributed. So, however, there are also some important point. Economy or us can also have high growth, high income, high government budget, but it may not necessarily invest enough into what is important. For example, malnutrition or stunting. Yeah. So World Bank actually have the typology of this kind of situation. So we can actually divide into four groups. Four groups. So there are group A where you have low capacity to mobilize, so poor. Yeah, you are poor, and also because poor you don't have low, you don't have you don't invest, yeah, in human capital. Let's say for SDG, you have B, you have high capacity to mobilize resource, you have high income, but you are not investing for some reason, so you have high weak outcome. Well, the best one is if you have high level of income and you have efficiency in human capital and also achieve that good outcome. What you don't want is, of course, A, yeah, but I think you don't want B too. Let me give you an example of these situations, yeah, in the context of Indonesia and the world. Still it's about malnutrition. One of the still about stunting. One of the main cause of stunting is actually not only about nutrition, yeah, but also about sanitations. Yeah. Baby can be fed good food, but if they are having diarrhea, they will spill out all the good food, yeah, and diarrhea come from bad sanitation. Yeah. So it is important, for example, that we have access to safe water. And this is the relationship between income per capita and access to safe water by country. Yeah. So it is clear that the richer you are, the more you have access to safe water. So if you are in Liberia, you are very have low access to safe water because you're poor. If you are in Belgium or Italy, of course you have almost 100% access to safe water simply because you are rich. You have resources to do that. Yeah? And then this is the relationship. So what about Indonesian regions? So I overlay Indonesian province here, and then the relationship seems to be okay. Yeah? And then I have also Indonesian districts, kabupaten or kota, and this is how the result of this overlaying. And you can see it's more scattered, yeah. But the relationship still well established. If you are in Jakarta, Jakarta is actually as rich as Belgium in terms of income per capita, and so you should expect that almost 100% access to safe water, which is makes sense. Yeah. If you are in Pegunungan Arfak in Papua, yeah, you are almost similar to Liberia in Africa. You don't have access to good safe water because you're poor, yeah, and you have the relationship. But what I would like to emphasize here, or what I would like you to look here, is that there are some exceptions. Yeah. You can see here, for example, these regions. Kutai is in East Kalimantan. It's okay. He is in the line of cross-country benchmark. But if you see other region, let's say Pasir, Tanah Tidung, Bengkalis, or even Kediri, yeah, they are actually region who are quite rich. They are similar in income level with Malaysia, actually. Yet their access to safe water is a lot less than what they have been, what they could have been. Why? Of course, there are so many reasons. Yeah, we need research on this, but at least I think the reason can be they don't have commitment. They have money, but their money is not committed to what's matter. The money committed to something else, which is not really as important as access to supporter. So this thing can happen. So that's one of the challenge. So government can fail to invest despite enough resources. Why? There are many reasons. One of them is political economy, political battle. Now let's turn to the other side of the talk, which is given to me by the organizer, which is the climate change or environmental aspect of the SDG. If you see this picture, this is the example of so many natural disasters, yeah, that may have been related to how we handle our environment. So we have Garut flash flood in 2016, 34 Rai. We have routine flood in Jakarta. We have congestions. We have haze in 2015 that caused almost 100,000 premature deaths, according to one of the credible research. And in around our neighbor here in kawasan Bandung Utara, you see that the landscape is changing from green to brown, and then this is dangerous to our groundwater resource of the Bandung population, right? So this is all environmental problem that actually has root cause from my perspective, which is economic root cause, and that root cause is because we don't value what we don't see directly. We value only what after it's gone. Many people say that don't wait until your couple or your someone you love gone until you give better affection to them. Simply, it's because the same. You don't really see it. You take it for granted. So let me give you, and that include climate change. Okay. So let me give you one illustration. One of the contributor of the global warming is deforestation, and deforestation, and one of the source of the deforestation is mangrove conversions. So emission from mangrove, for example, is high. Yeah. In 2015, for the last 15 years, I think I read in one of the paper, I think that the emission from mangrove conversion is actually in the world, yeah, including from Indonesia, is actually this have a similar size of emission compared with the Brazil total one country emission like Brazil. So it's big. Yeah. So what is the factor behind mangrove conversions that lead to global warming, lead to emissions of carbon emission, and lead to global warming? So let me illustrate this with one of research that done a few years back, yeah, by Edward Barbier, one of the UK economists. So if you have mangrove and you are deciding whether to keep it as mangrove or to convert it into shrimp farming. So this is the number that you have. The profit from shrimp farming is $9,000, almost more than $9,000. But the profit from keeping that as mangrove is only 584. Yeah. So as a profit taking entity, this is a no-brain decisions. 9,000 $9,000 compared to $600. Which one you choose? Shrimp farming. So you convert mangrove to shrimp farming. This is a no-brain decisions. Okay. Yet this is in Thailand. Yeah? Yet when you look at it again more carefully, in Thailand actually government was so keen at the time to have to promote export. Yeah? And one of the big potential of export is shrimp export. So they're subsidizing shrimp farming. They're subsidizing their land rent. They're subsidizing their uh, materials and things like that. So the subsidy is actually 8,000. So actually, it's all not that much different from the keeping the mangrove forest if you take away the subsidy. So now it's 1,220. But you have to include other things as well. Yeah? Mangrove actually is a place where mangrove is actually a place for fish nursery. So that's how the fish grow. So when you get rid of mangrove, the fish cannot grow, and when the fish cannot grow, fishermen cannot get fish, and then that value is 987. So we have to include that in the calculation. And now we can see the result is a little bit different. So now we can see that keeping mangrove as mangrove is actually more economically beneficial than converting it into fish shrimp farming. That's not the end of the story. When you do the calculation like this, you have to calculate the restoration cost, which is much bigger. So we have to restore, right? We have to calculate the restoration. And then the biggest of all is actually the benefit of mangrove as storm protection. So if you have storm, mangrove can also function to protect your property on the beach. So if you don't have this, then suddenly your property along the side of the coastline is unprotected. So then you can calculate what is the damage that can get, yeah, from this storm, and it's 10,000 per hectare per year. So now you can see, if you start from market economy, unregulated market economy, which give you this basis for decision, and then the real one, the green economy, which give you basis for decision, you can see that market actually hide many important things that nature provide to us. Then we actually have economic importance, but we ignore it because we don't see it. When you see it, so many of the environmental problem related to climate change is actually because of this reason. Yeah. So it's because economic system cannot not disclose, yeah, cannot disclose all the benefit of the resources. So because there's no market price for it. So if you still believe that market system is the best, the best system to our society without any government intervention, that's naive understanding of how market work. We cannot rely on economic system that disregard most things we value. So in terms of climate change actually is our economic system failure. This is the failure of our economic system to see what's hidden in the market. So we call it externalities. And also our failure to coordinate among countries because of the global externalities. Yeah? And also our myopic visions of the world. So we don't see the world from the perspective of what will happen in 50 to 100 years from now, only 5 years, because I will have to re-elect it next year, for example, as a politician. So now let me recap before I end it. So from those slides that I present, there are a few points that I would like to make here. First is that beside the SDG is actually about how we respond to injustice. One of them is social injustice, and that is the failure of market or capitalism to address that. So market or capitalism, the economic system that we are using today, is ignorant to economic injustice. So that's why we have SDGs. So that's the first point that I'd like to make. Okay. So, but also with the example of, well, let's say, stunting contribution, for example, to economic growth, and then starting actually was caused, one of them because of inequality. So the second point I would like to say is that inequality can lead to low human development and also slower growth. In fact, as I illustrated before, that if we can get rid of stunting, actually it can help us achieve our centennial or 100 years aspiration to become high income country in 2045. And the first, and the third point is externalities. Externalities mean we ignore the things that market doesn't value. Yeah? Or some people call incomplete cost accounting. Led to many environmental problems, including climate change. Yeah? Combined, of course, with global coordination failure. The fourth point that I would like to make is redistribution. We have to redistribute, not necessarily income, but opportunity. Yeah? And then also to address social injustice. Right? And then in terms of the environmental injustice, we need to address the externalities, which is we have to correct the market incentive system. So we have to make sure that all economic agents, including us, consumers, know what we pay. So we don't. This is very difficult because recently Indonesian government just increased the fuel price, right? BBM, people complain. Yeah? But if you do full accounting of BBM, you will have to pay a higher price too, because BBM or fuel come from coal, and coal contribute to climate change. You have to pay for the climate change effect of coal, or even to benzene. Yeah? Then you have to pay more than what you have now. But just increasing into economic price, you already complain. So this is very challenging. Right? So all these failures need more state or government role in the economy. So government need to play more important role, have to have more resource, have to have more capacity to address these issues, because we cannot leave this problem to the private sectors. Who else other than private sector can do this? Government. So government, we have to increase the capacity of the government, yeah, to address this. And this is challenging, yeah. Not only because we are not in the position to have government budget as high as Norway or Finland, for example, but also other next issues that I would like to address in the fifth point, which is political economic constraint often block reform. Why? Because reform have loser, have gainer, and those who lose won't stay. Okay, they will block the reform. Let's say, for example, we want to have a carbon tax. Who will lose from the carbon tax? Coal industrialists, coal industry. They were the one who get benefit from coal export, and now suddenly people have to pay higher price for coal. Of course, they won't be silent. We have to do something about it, and this is political economy bottleneck. So this is the concern. And the second one is democracy is something that we aspire to, but there are costs to democracy that we have to face. Yeah? Democracy often create new challenges. Yeah? I will address this later. So I think this one about political economic challenge. If you want to do reform, I would like to quote John J. Chapman, an American philosopher, I think. He said that reform consists in taking a bone from a dog. Philosophy will not do it. So if we want to do reform, environmental reform, social reform, someone must lose something. And that someone will block the reform. So if that someone lose something, then philosophy will not do it. We cannot discuss them about philosophy. They're losing their livelihood. So, and they will try to block the reform with many ways, including politics or legislation block. Yeah. So one key point that we have to do in how we handle this is first and foremost, you have to understand how effect of reform distributed, who gain, who lose, who you have to understand. You have to map them out. So you have to understand that, and then with that information, then you can try to navigate and to manage how the reform should progress to minimize the political conflict that can come out of the reform. And then the second challenge is about democratization. So Indonesia is actually not alone in terms of the democratization. During from the last few decades, many more democracy was born. You know, so you can see here, for example, the number of democracy has increased a lot from 1980 to today, and number of autocracy, have been declining. Yeah? So people more and more country becoming democracies, and that's not without challenge. Then into development. Why? Because when you are not democracy, like in China, you have single authority. You can direct resources sometimes very effectively, very efficiently. You don't need to listen to so many people before you're doing something right. Yeah? But that cannot be happen in a democracy. Yeah? In democracy, first of all, according to paper that is written by two colleagues of mine from King's College, so you have what is called domestic policy space, fiscal room. Indonesia, by legislation, cannot have more than 3% of GDP as budget deficit. So it means what? It means we cannot spend as much as we can for public spending. That's a result from democracy, because we don't want government have too much power in monetary policy, for example, in budget deficit. Yeah? And then second one, political consultation. So democracy will have multi-party. Legislation has go through multi-party dialogue, yeah? And that timely, that cost, not timely, that time consuming. Yeah? So cannot be quick. Yeah? So we need to address that. And the second one is societal demand. People, especially in the world of social media today, getting more and more, curious, getting more and more articulate, getting more and more vocal, yeah, in criticizing many government policy in social media or in many channels. So we have to address this too, and this is challenging. So this is so what we have to do is to take advantage of this to reform. And this is the last slide of mine. Will discuss about how we, as part of the higher education institution, can play a role in meeting all these challenges. So I have 3 points in terms of how higher education institution may play a role. First, we need high income so we can have high resources for progressive uh, actions, right? Progressive programs. Progressive mean to improve social justice and also to improve uh, uh, environmental agenda, right? So we need money to do that. We need money to pay our people who monitor pollution, and that will be government. So we need economic growth. So that economic growth must be led by innovation. This is a new growth theory. So you cannot expect economic growth only from investment. That won't last long. But you have to expect sustained economic growth only coming from innovation. That's coming from new growth theory. So higher education institutions, of course, is at its center through research to create innovation, to spur innovation, to diffuse innovation, so we can have higher growth that can sustain for a long time. So that's the first role, I think, that the university should do in meeting these challenges, so that we can have high economic growth through innovation, that higher economic growth will translate into more financial resources, so government then can use that to do many progressive programs. That's the first one. Second one is higher education should improve equality of opportunity. I mean, higher education opportunity. Okay, so we have to give education, higher education to everyone. Otherwise, social mobility and inequality cannot be addressed because higher education is a very important and effective vehicle for social mobility. Social mobility means if you were born poor, you shouldn't have to grow up poor. You can be rich through having degree from higher education. So then we have to improve the equality of our higher education system. Yet we are actually facing very big challenge because we have neoliberal agenda in terms of the higher education. We have liberalizing higher education everywhere, and you can read from a very uh, popular book recently published by Peter Flemings, The Academia. You have to read this book. It's a very important book. That's the first one. So that's the second role that I think we have to have as higher education institution. The last one is also equally important. So if we want to support socially and environmentally progressive reform, socially progressive reform mean reform that address inequality. Environmentally progressive reform, sorry, socially progressive reform is reform that need to address intra-generational injustice. And environmentally progressive reform is reforms to address the intergenerational injustice. Yeah, how a university can do that? By increasing the academic credibility of that reform. By analyzing that reform, if this reform is good, then you have to report to the public this reform is credible. So when public know from us, because university actually has a very twin advantage. First, university is seen by people as institution with scientific authority. So they know things. They are legit. People from university are legit. They have authority in the science. Okay? So people will believe that. But there are second one. People in higher education institution will be seen by public also as independent. So academic authority plus independent is twin advantage that no other institution in Indonesia or in the world has. So we have to capitalize on that. Yeah? By what? By this, by increasing academic credibility of good reforms, of socially and environmental progressive reforms, so the political economic constraint can be navigated more easily, and the domestic policy space in the new democratic era that is very challenging can also be navigated more smoothly. So the reform can take place and can help people to achieve SDGs. I think that ends my presentation. Thank you for the opportunity. We can have a discussion later on. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you, Professor Yusuf, for an insightful speech. Now we are pleased to invite Professor Yusuf to receive a certificate. Also, we kindly invite Ibu